There was heat in the air and there was heat on the track. That was the Austrian Grand Prix. I'm Josh and you're in the second seat. Well, welcome back everyone. An incredible weekend of racing in Austria at the Red Bull Ring. Huge amount of things to talk about today as we dive on in. But before we do, just remember the socials. Follow along on Instagram or on Spotify. Make sure you leave a comment or send me an email if you've got any questions or want to highlight any points from the races as we go throughout the season. So, what did you all think? I thought Austria was probably one of my favourite races so far this season after Japan. I think overall the action on track was great. A lot of close battles, Max and Lewis, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Charles Leclerc having a battle within himself with the challenges that he was facing and what have you, and then Kimi's run at the end of the race as well. So huge amount to talk about today. But first and foremost, congrats to George Russell on a great win. Pulled a rabbit out of his hat for the pole position lap. Despite some controversy around it, for myself, I'm really comfortable having seen both the data and the footage that was shown as George went through from the onboard camera side. It was definitely a yellow flag for him, and he's done everything correctly within the regulations. So I'll put that to bed first and foremost. He deserved to be on pole. It was a fantastic lap, and he did what was required of him based on the regulations. So if anything, it means again that the FIA and the race director needs to go back and have a look at the rules and determine whether or not they're fit for purpose. But I don't want to dive into that too much. I really want to start today with discussions on our Oceania lads, Oscar and Liam. And first and foremost, I want to talk about Liam Lawson because he is having an absolute cracker of a season. You may recall myself talking with Glenn from Aussie Motorsport Fan a few weeks ago on the podcast now. We were highlighting the potential for Red Bull's F2 driver Nicholas Solov to come in and take Liam's seat. Funnily enough, rumours surfaced of that. Both Red Bull and VCARB have denounced or shut down those rumours really, really quickly, which is positive in my mind because I, from a parochial sense, would be absolutely fuming if Liam lost his seat. He has scored points in all bar Australia and Miami this year. Miami was a DNF with that brake and engine failure resulting in that crash with Pierre Gasly. And in Australia, he finished P13 in just what isn't a happy hunting ground for him, unfortunately. His tangential home race. So for Liam, I think his lowest finishing position has been P9 as well. So, he is leading the way in that Racing Bulls team, and having a real cracker of a season in terms of the drives that he's had. Finishing was going to be an equal career best finish, P5 in Monaco, but with the Gasly turnaround, it's now P6. But still, he's been on the ball. His car was even potentially on fire at the start of the Austrian Grand Prix, and he still managed to bring it home within the points, achieving a fantastic double overtake of both his teammate Arvid Lindblad and Esteban Ocon during the latter stages. So, that was he's been a standout for them this year, and for him to lose his seat, I would be fuming. Because he deserves to be there. And, regardless of where Solov finishes this season, unless he wins the championship, even then I would be saying, mate, you can bide your time for 12 months. Oscar Piastri won Formula Renault, Formula 3, Formula 2, all back-to-back, and still had to sit out 2022 before he started with McLaren. Now, some of that was contractual issues due to the Alpine side of things, but he still sat out a season before he came in and went from there. So, and there's plenty of other options. Esteban Ocon is potentially on the hook for losing his seat and what have you too. So Liam is driving in a way that he deserves to maintain his spot at VCAB. And that's where I'll leave that. Oscar, another intriguing weekend for him. Similar to Barcelona in that during practice sessions, he is generally in the top 3 for pace. He last year built up quite a lot over the course of the weekend, but this year he's been quite consistent in terms of coming pretty strongly out of the gates from free practice 1 onwards. What's been intriguing and frustrating as not an Oscar fan, but a fan in general of the sport, and in liking McLaren as a team, their car just the guys just can't seem to get much more out of it from a single lap pace perspective. Race pace wise, they're not too bad. Like, he's showing that he can push and achieve podiums and finish in the top 5 pretty consistently so far this year. It just seems like the McLaren car itself just doesn't have the oomph behind it. The MCL 40 doesn't have that overall package that the MCL 39 did. And obviously from a regulations perspective, a lot has changed and there's a lot of development still to come. And a lot of teams brought packages to Austria, Red Bull being one of them, with effectively a new car from what Laurent Mekies was saying. But even Mercedes brought some, and obviously Audi in the backfield did as well. So, I'm hoping that McLaren over the course of the remainder of this year can actually keep building and give both Oscar and Lando something to fight with, because they certainly are capable drivers. Oscar in particular is a capable driver, and the other frustrating fact is hearing other commentators talking him down like he's having a really bad season, which he's sitting P4 in the championship now after Austria. He was sitting P5 previous to that, with 2 DNS, as in did not start. So, to be effectively on par statistics-wise going into Austria, they're now equal pretty much across the board. There was only really qualifying was the only point of difference, and Oscar was ahead by 1. Lando has equaled that now, so they're equal pretty much across the board, and Oscar's 1 point ahead. So it really just boggles my mind to see the likes of Nico Rosberg and Jacques Villeneuve lambasting him for poor performance when he's on par with the reigning world championship across the board. It's shit, to put it bluntly. And, for me, if those two guys weren't, if those two guys were British, I would blatantly say that it's British bias, but they're not, so I can't. And maybe it's because they work for Sky Sports F1 in Britain, but who knows? It boggles my mind, and it grinds my gears. But otherwise, Oscar drove really, really well, had some incredible overtakes. The one on Charles Leclerc at turn 3 to move up into P4 was fantastic. And it just shows the racecraft and overtaking skill that he has. And we saw some incredible overtakes from him last year as well. The one that comes to mind, again, was on a Ferrari. This time it was Lewis Hamilton, but at Jeddah last year, going around the outside through the dust and dirt. And even on Lewis Hamilton back in Australia at round one last year in the wet. So, Oscar's skill is definitely there, and he's showing that he can put the car where it needs to be to achieve some incredible overtakes. But I think the car itself is what is letting him down as opposed to his ability as a driver. So plenty to keep building on from a McLaren perspective, but both our lads performing really, really well and representing the region in a really positive manner. So keep it up, boys. Where I want to move to now, though, speaking about some fan favourites, is Max and Lewis. It was fantastic to see those two guys pushing the limits with each other again in a positive manner. In particular, the back and forth that they had sort of the mid-race there before Lewis's tyres really started to give out and he couldn't keep pace with Max and his absolute push towards the podium. And who knows if there had been another couple of laps, whether or not he could have won the race. Could have won the race if they pitted him a little bit earlier as well. But it was, in my mind, it was lovely to watch, a 7-time and a 4-time world champion going at it wheel to wheel in a far more carefree manner than, the likes of 2021, where there was far more on the line with both of them chasing that world championship at the end of the year. Whereas now they're both racing for the pure joy of it. And yes, they're still striving to be the best, but they don't have the pressure of trying to do the safer thing in order to maintain points and consistency of points to achieve or maintain a world title leading position. So for them, I think they would have really enjoyed that. I certainly did, sitting here back in Australia, compared to the fans that were there in Austria, who probably enjoyed it just as much as well. So really great to see for those two, and well done to Max on an incredible drive from P5 to P2. I think the strategy was absolutely on point, really aggressive. He wanted a more aggressive one, and I think when he says that, he's talking about pitting earlier to try and force the hand of Mercedes and what have you, because we saw with certainly George's car, the tyre side of the tyre life just fell off. And George was certainly struggling for pace, had a couple of mistakes, and it really helped bring things a bit closer. Both Max and Kimi towards the end there, who somehow managed to maintain his tyre life a bit better. But well done to Max, second podium of the season, highest finishing position so far this year. And I think going into Silverstone this coming weekend, Red Bull will be really keen to capitalise on the work that they've done so far with that package. It seems to be a really positive thing for them. Isaac Hadjar wasn't far off the pace either, finishing or qualifying 1.5 tenths behind Max. So, Red Bull should be proud of the work they've done, both in terms of having the best internal combustion engine side, as we've now seen under the ADUO side of the house, and obviously their performance in Austria was incredible. And yes, Max loves that track and has a really positive record there, but I think if the car didn't have the upgrades that they brought this weekend or this past weekend, I don't feel like Max would have finished or been able to achieve the drive that he did. So, speaking of Kimi, this kid is having a stellar season. It's actually kind of frustrating to watch that he's performing so well. You kind of expect a lot of people to come through and take their time building up before they start achieving a lot of high things. Even Max still took a couple of years to really cement himself in such a way, or even put himself in a position to be leading a world championship. So, Kimi could be at the same level as Max and Lewis and Senna and Prost and those types of guys. And, I don't like to talk about them in that way. I hold similar views to Max in terms of different era, different cars, and things like that. But he could very well be a generational talent. So, one to watch for the rest of the year. I think it's his championship to lose. And the guy that he's going to lose it to is his teammate in George Russell, who had a standout weekend. Had some troubles with the car a bit in the practice sessions, particularly practice 3 and in qualifying. It took the majority of those 2 sessions to actually get the car in a setup that he felt comfortable in, but was able to get the most out of as well. And, free practice 3 was the last 15 minutes before he was able to actually put a decent run together that you would expect from him, given the Mercedes rocket ship. And then similar for qualifying, he was not scraping through, but he was sitting in the middle of the top 10 for large parts of qualifying. And then Q3 comes and we're down to the last minute. Max shunts it at turn 9 into the barriers. Yellow flag for about 15 seconds, which is enough for George to just show that he could lift, or did lift enough. But he was still on track to, go another 1.5 tenths faster than the time that he actually put on pole. So, huge amount of track evolution there, but it just shows how quick he was actually going in that qualifying lap. So well done to George for A, qualifying, and B, the race in and of itself. A couple of mistakes towards the end there, but I think that was, a lot of tyre life issues and what have you. So for Mercedes this coming weekend at Silverstone, there's a bit of work for him to do to understand why he's not getting the most out of the tyres in comparison to his teammate Kimi, who seems to be able to drive on tyres like they're not dying at all. So really interesting points for them to consider moving forward. Speaking of Silverstone, interesting race coming up this weekend. Home race for a lot of teams. A lot of teams are based in and around the Silverstone area. Cadillac and Aston Martin are both adjacent Silverstone circuit itself. And then you've got the likes of all the teams around Silverstone, with McLaren at Woking and Red Bull at Milton Keynes, and obviously Mercedes not far away either. So there'll be Williams too as well at Grove. So there's going to be a lot happening from a media and a fanfare and fan engagement and things like that. A lot of distractions to occur. So that, for me, is going to be intriguing, particularly for someone like Kimi, who last year it may have been a bit of water off a duck's back because he didn't have the limelight on him in the same way that he now does, leading the championship and being the youngest person to ever lead the championship. So, for me, there'll be a lot of pressure on Kimi. He seems to hold it pretty well, but maybe the extra limelight this week at Silverstone will potentially impede that. George, again, chasing has a lot of pressure on him to catch Kimi, and the early pre-season and early season expectation was that he would be the front runner for the Drivers' Championship this year, and he's not in that space right now. So for the Mercedes guys, I think they'll try to do the right thing and keep George and Kimi pretty focused and tight-knit, and then go from there. Hopefully they get a chance to enjoy it. Lando stand is back, bigger than what it was last year. So the reigning world champ will continue to enjoy that side of things. And for me, he, at this point in time, is seems very apathetic to what's happening with McLaren. And I was chatting with someone about this recently. It looks like from an outside perspective that he's apathetic, and I put that down to, he's come through the late 20 teens, so 2019 with his rookie season, early 2020s, where McLaren was struggling. They were a midfield team and, had a lot of issues with scoring points and podiums and wins and things like that. And it wasn't until, really 2024 and 2025 where they cemented themselves as one of the top teams. It just seems like that's sort of where he's fallen back to is, hey, this is okay. We're back in the development phase and we'll go from there. So part of me still thinks that he'll pull a Rosberg and potentially retire out of nowhere. I don't know if he doesn't seem to have that love for racing. I don't know. Maybe he's actually maybe that's the point, is the carefree nature that he's displaying is he's at a point now where he's like, I've won my drivers' championship. I actually don't need to care anymore. I'm just going to go racing for the enjoyment of it. And maybe that's the point. So, in terms of Oscar and Liam, Oscar should, in my mind, have won Silverstone last year. I was fuming at the penalty, and I was fuming at McLaren for not fighting for it enough, and it just added to the perception that McLaren as a team favoured Lando. We can probably do an entire episode on that point in and of itself. So I'm hopeful that Oscar can have it this weekend. He seems to do well at Silverstone. Seems to be a track that gels well with his driving style. So whether or not he can take that in the car and, score a podium, yet to be seen. My predictions so far, I think we're going to see the likes of Kimi and George at the front again, but I think Max will definitely be up there. And I actually think Lewis will probably be chasing pretty hard as well. There's a lot of medium and high speed corners at Silverstone rather, but there's a lot of areas that need a lot of high downforce piece as well. So I think Ferrari, but Lewis more specifically, will have a pretty good weekend. So, but ultimately, Austria, like I said, up there with one of my favourite races for this year. Red Bull Ring in and of itself is one of my top 5 tracks. So, to see the outcome of A, the race, but B, the type of race collectively that it was fantastic. And I think it's done a lot for the sport. So congrats again to George. Well done to Max and Red Bull in particular for the upgrades that they brought, and for Oscar and Liam continuing their points hauls. Really pleased to see our two boys doing really, really well on the global stage. And as I've said previously, if you're not aware, having both Liam and Oscar inside the top 10 is the first time that we've had an Australian and a New Zealand driver inside the top 10 of the Drivers' Championship from a seasonal perspective since the late 60s, I think 1966 or 67, where it was Jack Brabham and Bruce McLaren and Denny Holmes. So, a huge amount of history that our two lads are making this year alone, and, really want to continue to see them do well as we move forward. Yeah, so that's about all I've got time for today. Don't forget to hit us up on socials, like, share, and follow at @the_second_seat and at the second seat F1 on Spotify. Send in any comments or questions you may have. We'd love to get you guys involved with the podcast. But until next time, let me know if you want to know more. Cheers.